Welcome back to the series, everybody. Today we are going to be actually adding a product to the database. Now, I'm working in Android today. You can work on either platform. I worked on iOS last time, so I just want to kind of make sure everything's functioning correctly. So I'm going to switch platforms today, but no reason you can't do this one in iOS. So I'm going to start by bringing in a package before I actually fire up my emulator, and I'm going to get the UUID package. And this is one that I use with Firestore pretty much any time that I am using it if I'm going to be inserting records. So I'm going to copy that dependency. I'm going to take it into my pubspec.yaml. And I'm save that, let it pull it in, and then I'm going to start the emulator. All right, so here we go. I am going to log in. Go to our vendor page. We've got our products here, and when we last left off, we had a drop down that I had done on iOS, and I can see it works here in material as well. We've got state for each one of these objects. We have a disabled button here that's not going to be enabled until we have valid values for each one of these fields, so we're in good shape. But now we need to actually add a product to Firebase and or Firestore actually, and for starters we're going to need a model. So let's go to lib and let's go to our models folder, and we want to create a new model for products. And so we'll call it product.dart. And if you recall, when we mapped all this out, we created a class model for ourselves for the future reference. And so I'm going to slide that over here, and I'm going to try to zoom in on it so you can see it if you're on a phone. That's the wrong direction. That's too much. There we go. That's some riveting YouTube right there. Okay. So starting with our class name, we will call it product. And let's give ourselves some properties here. So obviously we will need a product name. I called it name here in the class, but I think in the actual, or in the diagram, I think in the actual class, I'm going to call it product name. Be a little clearer. We'll do a string, final string, which is going to be our unit type. We'll do a final double for our unit price. And let's see, integer for units available. And you know what? I think we called that available units on our state object. So let's keep consistent with that. So we'll call it final integer available units. Let's see, we've got a vendor ID. So that will be a string. We have a product ID, also going to be a string. We have got an image URL, which is going to be a string. We've got a final Boolean, which will be approved, and a final string of note here. My dog's decided to snore now. Shh. So these are our objects that we have fields for here: the product name, unit type, unit price, available units. The vendor ID, that's going to be the user ID from our Firebase authentication. We want to know who the user was who added to this so we can link it to their products page. We're going to want some kind of unique key for the product ID. We're going to have an image URL, which we have kind of set up the the infrastructure for adding later on. It's not actually hooked up, but that will be a string. That's going to be optional. When we discuss this as planning, I think we have here that they can add an image. We've got an extension there. They don't have to add an image. We can have a default if they don't want to. We have this approved product, which when we discussed this, we decided that the administrator role in this application would be later phases. And so in the later phases, we can have the administrator have to approve a product. But for our early iterations, this is just going to be automatically set to true. And then I also felt that a note field in the products would be helpful, because if the vendor wants to mark a product as unavailable, they can do that through saying they have no units available. But often in a farmer's market type of environment, that may mean that they're just simply out. It may mean that they are waiting for more to ripen. It could mean they're completely done for the season with that product. It could mean that a certain variety is run out, but another variety is forthcoming. And so just simply out of stock really isn't helpful in a farmer's market environment. Being able to add a note of, check back next week we'll have more that are ripe, or this variety is coming, would be helpful for the vendor to be able to communicate to the customer, and for the customer to know exactly what's going on with that product. And so we aren't going to do anything with that field in this initial iteration, but we do want to make room for it in the model. All right, so having said that, we need a constructor, and what I just said is going to inform what we do with our constructors. So we do want it to be a named constructor, and I'm going to put each property on its own line. And so for available units, well, I'm just going to let this thing fill it in, because it's just so easy to go down here and let it throw the fields out, as it doesn't matter the order. And just throw my semicolon down there. All right, so approved. Let's make that required. It's going to be a dummy value, but that doesn't mean that we don't necessarily want to always see a value there in our models. So we'll need to bring in, we can bring in material, we can bring in Cupertino, we can also bring in foundation just to get this required flag decorator, I should say. Available units, that's definitely going to be a required field. Image URL, now we said this is not going to be a required field, and we're going to set it equal to a blank string. So if we didn't set it equal to anything, it just wouldn't be in the record at all. I'd like to have the field there, but I'd like to have it blank. And I want to do the same thing for the note. So you don't have to add it, but if you don't do anything with it, you are still going to get a field in the database. It's just going to be a blank value. Product ID is definitely going to be required. And actually, product name, unit price, unit type, and vendor ID also all required. All right, now anytime you're working with Firestore, you are going to be passing it maps, and you are going to be getting maps back. And we want to work in our app with objects, our Dart objects, which we just modeled up here. And so we need a way to take a Dart object and convert that into a map, and we need to be able to do the reverse, take in a map, have that turn into a Dart object we can use. So we want a couple of functions here. One is going to be our toMap function. So we'll take in a map, or actually pass out a map, and it will be string keys and dynamic values. And we'll call that toMap. And this is going to give us a map. So we'll return a map where we can start to name our properties. And just like with auth, we want to mirror our property names in Firestore. If you're an absolute purist who feels that anything going into that kind of database should be in snake case, this is your opportunity to do that. You could do this as product name like that. I am not a purist, and I am going to keep the casing and the values the same in the database as they will be in my objects. Say I'm not a purist about this. Other things, yes. Try to add the designated hitter to baseball, and I'm likely to get upset. All right, available units here. Approved. I'm going to do approved there. Next field I'll do is image URL. Note, product ID, vendor ID, and that should do it. We'll need a semicolon at the end there. Take a glance up and down and make sure that these are matching each other exactly, that you don't have any typos in here, particularly on the left side. If you had any typos on the right, they would be highlighted by IntelliSense, but on the left, this is just a free-form name for the field, which we're trying to make match our property names. But if we had a typo in here, then it would not know, and we would have some trouble down the line. Oh, let me get out of there. Get outside of the map. And the next function we need is to take the map in and pass out a product object. So I'm going to do product.fromFirestore. And that is going to take in a map with string keys, dynamic values. I'm going to call it whatever I want, and I'm going to call it Firestore in this case. Lay down a colon, and let's do the exact opposite. So on the left side are our properties from our object, and we're not going to use a colon here. We'll use an equal sign, and we are mapping them to the properties in our database, which we have determined we are going to match exactly. And if you are working in snake case here, then you want snake case here to map to your camel case property. I'm just gonna, thinking maybe it'll be a little quicker to copy and just replace. So I've got available units, approved, image URL, note, product ID, vendor. So I'm gonna take unit price, change it to available units. I don't think I'll save too much time typing there, but I won't have to type Firestore bracket every time. A good YouTuber would speed this up. But I didn't tell you to click on this video, so you get what you get. Image URL here. Oh, see, that would have been a problem, so let's make sure we get the image URL. Image URL. All right, then we need note. And if we weren't actually making sure that we had a value for note and image URL, we need to do something there to recognize the fact that that field wouldn't be there. But since we're forcing that field to go into the database, even if it's blank, then we don't have to worry about that. All right, that's vendor ID. All right, and then when we're done, we want to end the last field with a semicolon. I'm just going to glance up and down, make sure I don't have any typos. And looks pretty good to me. All right, so with that all said, I know that's a little bit tedious. I work a lot in the C# environment, and we have a nice little mapper in the entity framework that will just read the database and create all these models for us. And I hope someday we'll have an equal level of object relational mapper for Dart, particularly coming from Firestore, because it's kind of a pretty common case. But we don't have that yet, so we have to map this out by hand. So now that we have a model, let's go to our services and let's make sure that we have a service to actually add the product once we pass it to the service. And so for starters, I think I'm just going to take this add user, and I'm going to come down here. I'm going to paste that in, and we'll replace add user with add product. And so we're not going to pass it a user object. We're going to pass it a product object. And the collection we will add to, let's call it products. That seems pretty descriptive. Let's wrap this a little bit. Let's just... All right, so we need to bring in our product model. Let's do that. And so for our document reference, we're going to give it the product ID. So product.product ID. And then we're going to set data. And so we'll go product, and then we can call our toMap function. And this is going to take that object, and it is going to turn it into a map so that Firestore knows what to do with it. We are pulling the product ID, and we're gonna make that our document reference. And so when we have a product and we have a product ID, we can just tell Firestore, here's where you're gonna go. You're gonna go to the collection, products collection, and you're gonna go right to this document with this ID. It's not even a query. It is simply just referencing a document, and it will be very, very fast. So that's all we need to do here. And now that we can call a service function to add a product, let's go to our product block, and let's give ourselves a function that will pass a product object to that service for adding. So I'm going to come below. Oh, I didn't realize I misspelled dispose. Gonna have to go fix that in app.dart. If you did that too, I'm just gonna fix dispose in product block and app.dart. All right, so now I come down below my newly properly spelled dispose function, and I'm gonna set up a save product function. And so I'm going to create a product here in the block from the different streams that I have available. So I'll call it var product, and that's going to be a new product. I can omit the word new, and I need to make sure we bring in that new model we made. Might as well add the semicolon while I'm down there. And so let's start with approved, and remember we're going to hard code this as true, and then available units. And so this is going to be coming out of our stream, so I do want to change it to an integer, so we'll parse the available units, and I'll take the value out of that stream. So this is the private variable, the underscore variable. Let's see what's next. Oh, it's got my semicolon. I'll hit Control Space on my my Mac, and I will get the next one is product ID. And so here is where I want to use the UUID package to invent a product ID. So go up to the top of the block here. Let's see, down below this list of variables here. Let's do var UUID is equal to UUID, and I'm going to need to import that package. Right. Also, while I'm up here, why don't I add a reference to our Firestore service? So I'll do final DB equals Firestore service, because we're going to be interacting with that very shortly. All right, now that I have a UUID variable, that's very difficult to say, I can then enter UUID, and I'll get a number of options. I'm going to use v4, which is a, I believe, a random one. And I'll go product name next. That will be my product name stream.value. And I'm going to put a trim on that because that's coming right from the user. Unit price, so that is going to be a double. So double dot parse, and I will double dot parse unit price dot value. Not so worried about trimming that because the parse will take care of that. Unit type, we'll do unit type dot value. I'm not going to worry about trimming that because it's coming off the drop down, so then nobody's typing into that. Vendor ID, so we're going to need a value there. We don't yet have that available in our block. Image URL, so let's start with a blank one. And also the note, we're just going to pass in the blank. And actually we can omit those if we want to, because that's what we'll get by our default value. All right, so we do need to figure out how we can get the vendor ID, because we do need to pass that into our product. So if we go to app.dart in the root, we can look up at the providers that we have being passed in, and one is our auth block. So that auth block is available anywhere to us right here in the widget tree. Now, the product block is not technically part of the widget tree, so we want to get it in our edit products page through provider, and then we want to pass it into the product block so it has it available when it's ready to save the product. And so let's add a field first of all so that we will be able to receive that value in our product block. All right, so we can create a final underscore vendor ID, and we can create a behavior subject that is a string, and we will want to make sure that we dispose of that stream. So we'll close it in our dispose method. All right, now we don't actually need a getter because we don't want to be getting this outside of our block, but we do need a setter for that. So let's do a function. It would pass in a string, it'll getter, and that will be change vendor ID. And that will just go to our vendor id.sync.add. So then we will be able to pass in the vendor ID from the edit product page. So with that available, instead of this blank string for vendor ID, we can now pass vendor ID.value. We haven't actually taken care of the part where we pass this block in, but it is ready to receive it. All right, so that's declared our product, which we're not doing anything with yet. So let's actually complete this function by adding it to Firestore. So let's return db add product, and we are going to pass it our product item from up there. That should be add product. There we go. All right. Now, I'd kind of like to know if that succeeds, and of course the user will want to know eventually too, but in the meantime, we can print to the console. So let's give ourselves a then. So this is going to be a future if we're adding here. So let's make this an async function. And let's mark this as a future that is going to be void because we're just going to print to the console for now. We can change that later if we need to. If the value, let's see, if we go to then the value is just going to print to the console. So I am going to replace this null with print product saved. And I'm going to catch any errors. I should wrap this. Let's do and if we get an error, I'm just going to print the error. And let's see, we need to, I overwrote my error. Let's start over. Error. Print error. Okay, just clean up a couple extra lines here and I will format that. And that is our save product function. Now, it's going to add every time, so we're going to want to come back and revise this when we go to edit the product and make some kind of check and make sure that it doesn't already have a UUID. And if it does, then we update versus adding. But we're all set to add a product here. So now we can step out to our screens, edit product, and there's a couple things we need to do here. One is we need to obtain the vendor ID and pass it to the product block. And then lastly, we need to hook in that save function so that when we hit the button, save product, it actually sends it to Firestore. All right, so we look up here and we are bringing in the product block here. Here's how I want to approach this. So I'm going to bring in, first of all, I want to bring in the auth block. So I'll create a variable called auth block. I will set that equal to provider of context, and I will specify that I want this to bring in the auth block. And I will import the auth block. All right, so the actual property I'm looking for, there is a user stream on the auth block here that has the user object which contains the user ID. So that's what I want to get at. So we'll go back to edit products, and the way I'll get at that is I am going to return a stream builder. And I'm going to create a stream, which is context goes to authblock.user. So I'm going to create a stream off just that user object, and then I'm going to give it a child. And for the child, I am going to refactor this a little bit. So I'm going to take this expression here, I'm going to copy it, and my child is going to depend on the platform. And if that platform is iOS, then I want to return the app sliver scaffold here. So I did not need the return function. And I don't need the semicolon, so then I'm going to come here. Now, if it is iOS, then or is not iOS, then I want to return this materials scaffold. So I'll copy that, return this here. All right, let's make this happy. Let's give it a semicolon there. Oop. We can now get rid of all of this. And, oh, I did not mean to do a stream builder there. That's supposed to be a stream provider. There we go. All right, so now I pass this user stream into the stream provider. So down here in my page body, I can bring that in, and I'm going to bring it in with a consumer because I don't have a build widget between here and here. I've got this, helper widget function, but it's not a build. I could, put in a builder widget here, or I could cast this to its own widget, and then it would have a build function. Or I can just use the consumer method because that doesn't require a build method in between the declaration of the stream provider and actually pulling it in. So I'm going to return a consumer with a type of user. All right, and in there, I'm going to put a builder. And the builder takes a context, which I don't care about, so I'm just going to let that know I don't care about it by putting an underscore. And then it takes a dynamic object, which I am going to call user. And let me import user before I forget. So that's a user model coming out of our models folder here. And then it takes a third object, which is escaping me at this point. Okay, that's a widget, and I also don't care about that either. So I'm going to do double underscore because I've already used underscore here to signify that. And then I am going to open up curly braces. And so if I put whatever widgets I'm using inside of this builder here, inside the consumer widget, then I will get the benefit of the value of whatever I passed into the stream builder, which is our user object through the auth block. Okay, so I hope you're all with me still. I'm going to grab this entire list view and I am going to put it inside the builder. All right, so it now has the benefit of being able to use this user stream as if it's actually just a static variable, sort of. It could pass through null, so I want to make sure that that doesn't happen. So I'm going to say if my user does not equal null, then let's go ahead and build this list view. Now I'm going to go to the bottom of the list view and I'm going to give it an alternative. If the user hasn't been built yet, I am just going to do a blank container for now. Okay, good, except that what we haven't done yet is actually pass that user to the back end. So we've made sure we check for the user and we don't actually get all of this and the ability to save anything until it is registered the authenticated user and we're able to grab their user ID for a vendor ID, but we need to pass that to the block. So we can do that right here. So if we come inside the builder in front of our return list view, we can say if the user is not, actually I want to use an if statement. If the user is not equal to null, then we want to not do what I just did. We want to go to the product block and we want to call the change vendor ID and we want to pass it user dot user ID. All right, so that was a lot, but we should now be able to, actually one more thing, we should almost be able to add to our product, or add our product to the database. Coming down here to our save product button, we do not have an on press method yet, so let's give it product block dot save product, and remember to take off those parentheses like that. All right, so now in theory, when we click the save product button, it's going to go to the product button, product block. It's going to go to the save product method. It's going to load it up with either default values or generated values or the values from our fields. It's going to get that vendor ID because we passed it in when we loaded the edit product page. And we are going to add it to Firestore. So at this point, I'm going to restart the state. Going to go to the vendor page. I'm going to click add product, and I am going to try to add some corn. And we're going to sell that by the dozen. We're going to sell it for $5 a dozen. And I have 20 dozen of corn available. And I'm going to click save product. I'm going to get in my terminal product saved. I'm going to go to Firebase. I'm going to go to my go to console, farmers market, database, and hopefully I will see a products collection. And I do. I have got corn by the dozen. I see some values here that I've added already. But here's the one that we just added with 20 units of corn. I think if I click it again, we'll probably get another one just like that. So you shouldn't be able to do that. We've got to work on that eventually. But at this point, we are adding products to the database. All right, next step, next time, when we add the product, we want to bounce out here back to our products page, and we should see the products that we've added here in the products page. And then we want to be able to click on them and go right back to that form that we were on, have it pre-populate with the values that we have in our database, and then enable the ability to edit those values if we need to change them. So that'll be next time on the series. Thanks for watching, and we will see you then.